Entonces, bueno, tenemos a la doctora Mariana Martínez, que es licenciada en Psicología Clínica con especialidad en la infancia y la familia de la Universidad Profesional de California. Y aparte, Mariana ha estado con el Centro Bowen para el Estudio de la Familia en la Universidad Georgetown en Washington desde el año 2008. Es profesora con el centro y también dirige la clínica, como la clínica que tenemos aquí en la universidad, que le da servicios a la comunidad. Y Mariana ha tenido la tarea especial del centro de supervisar todo el proceso de cómo se va a hacer un puente al español de la teoría de Bowen, de la traducción de sus libros y sus trabajos. Ella estuvo con nosotros acá en la universidad hace 3 semanas cuando tuvimos la conferencia con el doctor Papero, y trajo algunos de los libros de él traducidos al español y continúa en la tarea de dar a conocer su teoría, y entonces pues quiere compartir con ustedes las aplicaciones clínicas, la teoría de Bowen. La presentación hoy se da en español como parte de nuestro esfuerzo de apoyar al Centro Bowen en poder diseminar esta información en nuestro idioma. Pero Mariana escribe perfectamente el inglés, así que si en algún momento alguien tiene que usar un vocablo o una pregunta en inglés, estoy segura que Mariana puede responderles sin ningún problema. Mariana, no sé si quieres contarle a los estudiantes algo más de ti antes de que ellos se presenten.
Sí, cómo no, estoy muy contenta de estar con ustedes. Ya estuve ahí hace unas semanas en persona, pero ahora tengo la oportunidad de hacer una presentación sobre la teoría de manera de manera completa. Es una introducción y voy a utilizar un caso al final para explicar cuál es el trabajo que se hace en base a la teoría. Yo soy mexicana y estoy en Washington desde hace 10 años, así que por eso, digamos que mi interés en diseminar la teoría en los países de habla hispana, en Latinoamérica y en España, y para la población de habla hispana en Estados Unidos.
¿Y has recopilado
Estoy a su disposición para que después, si alguno me quiere contactar, tiene más interés en seguir estudiando la teoría, tenemos muchas ofertas en nuestro centro y con mucho gusto puedo establecer un contacto personal con cada uno de ustedes.
Perfecto. ¿Y has encontrado, puedes compartir un poco con los estudiantes qué has encontrado en términos de cuánto se conoce la teoría de Bowen en nuestros países latinos y en España?
Sí, fíjate que yo, como la mayoría de la gente, estudió Bowen como de pasadita, ¿no? Dentro del gran programa amplísimo del estudio de la terapia familiar o de las teorías de terapia familiar, se ubica Bowen como uno de los fundadores del movimiento de terapia familiar hace muchos años, en los 50, y después ya vienen los demás y como que los demás siguen, son los que toman relevancia. Entonces, yo me encuentro, después yo estudié en San Diego, estudié mi doctorado, donde esa fue mi experiencia, o sea, que había oído de Bowen. Después regresé a México y trabajé muchos años, tuve una clínica y trabajaba también en una organización, y digamos que lo perdí de vista completamente. Pero a la hora de ir a Washington me encuentro con el Centro Bowen y me acerco y me doy cuenta de que la teoría no es una teoría muerta, que fue uno de los inicios, sino es una teoría viva, es una teoría en desarrollo, es una teoría que se está actualizando, refinando, pero que tiene en sus orígenes un poder que yo no había encontrado en ninguna de las otras teorías que había estudiado después. Yo me había abocado a tomar lo mejor que yo pensaba ofrecían los diferentes modelos, pero a la hora de acercarme a Bowen y de estudiarla en profundidad, me doy cuenta que es una teoría bien completa, es una teoría que por sí misma se sostiene y que por sí misma puede responder a la explicación del porqué del comportamiento humano y dar pautas para el cambio y el mejor funcionamiento. Entonces, me intrigó muchísimo, me capturó el rigor intelectual de las personas que están en el centro y lo que le llamamos el network, otras personas que no pertenecen formalmente al centro, pero con las que estamos en contacto constantemente. El interés en constatar las hipótesis que propone la teoría con los hechos que va revelando distintos distintas ciencias, con los hechos fácticos. Entonces me ha mantenido el interés durante todos estos años y me ha ofrecido como clínica una solidez que no tenía antes, que no creo que sea nada más porque soy 10 años más grande, sino es una forma de entender, una forma de comportarme y un desarrollo personal, porque eso no sucede si no hay un desarrollo personal del terapeuta también, un desarrollo personal que no me había ofrecido ningún otro modelo, ni de terapia familiar, ni de otro tipo de terapia individual o de crecimiento individual. Entonces, para mí es fabulosa la teoría. No sé, el, curiosamente, yo pensaba que no se conocía de plano en Latinoamérica, en España, que nadie sabía de ella.
Sí.
Pero conforme he estado haciendo este esfuerzo por contactar gente que se interese en ella en español, me doy cuenta de que ahí está. Hay gente que la conoce, hay gente que la utiliza, lee los libros, los pocos recursos en español que hay los tienen a la mano o lo estudian en inglés. Pero yo conozco ahora que me ha abocado a esto, hay gente en Chile, en Panamá, República Dominicana, en España, en México, en Venezuela. Entonces, de pronto se me abre un universo de gente que ha tenido muy poca manera de ir estudiando la teoría, pero que a la hora de leer lo poco que pudo leer, le encontró ese valor y se han como, digamos que, aferrado a esa información y luego pues se han tenido que amoldar a lo que ofrece un poco también el mundo, pero a la hora que yo les digo, oigan, está esto y esto que pueden acceder, inmediatamente lo toman y muchísima gente me dice, no, es que ese es el modelo que yo uso, del modelo de Bowen, como la base de mi trabajo clínico. No sé si todos sean, digamos que cuál sea la interpretación de la teoría de estas personas, no a todas las conozco, pero hay un interés, la teoría está viva, las semillas están ahí sembradas.
Qué bueno.
Y que ha pasado la prueba del tiempo.
Qué bueno, bueno, suena como que ha sido enriquecedora para ti a nivel personal y profesional. Y esa ha sido también la experiencia de nuestra coordinadora de programa de matrimonios y familias, Irma Barrón, que no se encuentra con nosotros porque está fuera este semestre. Pero ella descubrió la teoría a través de su jefe de disertación en la Universidad de Nova Southeastern University. Tampoco conocía la teoría. Y escogió estudiarla a más profundidad y también traerla a nuestros estudiantes. Y creo que a través de nuestros estudiantes que han recibido esa teoría, también ha viajado esa teoría. Por ejemplo, hemos tenido graduados que han ido y han enseñado otra vez en universidades en Colombia, en Argentina, en Chile. Eso también sería interesante ver dónde están todos ellos que han llevado esa teoría de vuelta. También hemos escuchado que en Puerto Rico también hay interés, donde tenemos 2 otros recintos en 2 ciudades diferentes en Puerto Rico. E incluso escuchamos que había un grupo interesado en trabajar esta teoría en Cuba, que es un sistema muy cerrado psicológicamente. Sin embargo, también oímos que hay un interés ahí. Así que sí, las semillas andan por ahí y hay que potenciarlas. Antes de que se presenten los estudiantes, te quería dar unas gracias, especialmente Mariana, por venir a visitar nuestra universidad cuando viniste y por tomarte el tiempo para hablar con nuestros estudiantes, y esperamos que esto dé inicio a una conversación más amplia en el futuro y también con nuestros recintos en Puerto Rico. Así que muchas gracias, siéntete en casa. Gracias. Y aquí te doy a nuestro primer estudiante para que se presente.
Buenas noches, Mariana.
Hola.
Hola, mi nombre es Nuri Chávez y soy estudiante de Carlos Alviso Universidad. Soy postgraduado de Carlos Alviso y estoy en estudios. Vine hoy para abrir mis conocimientos más y tener más herramientas para mi futuro de terapista.
Gracias, Nuri. ¿Y tu estudio es en terapia familiar?
Es en Mental Health Counseling.
Ok. Gracias.
Hello. Hello. My name is Jeremy. I'm also a student here at Carlos Albizu, and I'm studying for mental health counseling.
Okay. Now, Jeremy, do you understand Spanish? Like,
Very
or
little.
hmm?
Very little.
Very little. Um, okay, let me think about what we're gonna do because it would be important for you to engage in the conversation. Would you pass the microphone to the next person and I'm gonna attend this person.
Hola, ¿me oye?
Ahora.
Mi nombre es Rosalba Aguilar y estoy estudiando para Mental Health Counseling también.
Uh-huh. Ahora, Rosalba and Nuri, do you speak English?
Yes.
So maybe it would be worth to do it in English. What do you think? Yeah. What can we do? I would hate for Jeremy not to get what the content.
Well, originally I had asked Irma, if you wanted to do the lecture in English, then it would be more inclusive. But I understood from her and from you that you wanted to do it in Spanish for the particular purpose of supporting your goal at the moment. But it's up to you. If you would like to proceed in English, I think that would be great. It's as you wish.
Of course, my slides are in Spanish. Let me see.
I think Jeremy can cut you a break with the slides.
Say that again?
I think Jeremy will cut you a break with the slides.
Yes, I cannot translate them right away. I was thinking if I had the same presentation in English, but I don't think so. So I'm going to go back and forth. All right, so this is going to be
you don't have to translate verbatim, But I think it's very nice of you to switch, and then at least the gist of it is the most important thing, that the main tenets of the theory and the case will be communicated to the students, because we will have others walking in later who might be in different places in the spectrum of even the ones that are bilingual, Some of them speak it better than others.
Yeah. I would rather not have people coming in afterwards.
All right, I'm going to talk to my assistant to see who else is coming, so that if
they want to come, they're welcome to come in now. But I think that it's better if they'll get just bits and pieces that I don't think make sense.
Ones are coming at 7. All right, I'm going to check in to see who else is ready, and if not, we'll close it. How's that?
Okay, that's good.
Perfect.
So I'm going to start. So I come from representing 2 places, and can you see my screen now? No, I didn't do the screen share, right? Hold on. I was setting up the PowerPoint. There, can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay, so that's the Bowen Center for the Study of the Family in Georgetown, and that's my Bethesda Family Therapy. That's my private practice, and so that's where I also see clients. So before we begin, I would like you to get a piece of paper and write down 3 things that you know about Bowen theory. Take a few minutes for that, and write down 2 questions that you have in mind when you decided to come to this conference. That's why I like to have small groups, because we'll be able to hear everybody. So 3 things that you know about the theory, and 2 questions that you have. Very brief ideas. Rosalba, would you like to start? You can share the 3 things or 1 thing, it doesn't matter. 1 or 2 questions, it doesn't matter.
Well, I actually have one thing. I know it's about family.
You what?
I know it's about family. I haven't studied him a lot, so and I have two things that I would like to know. First, actually, to study to know more about the theory about how does it work, and second, how does it impact the families according to his theory.
Okay. All right, good questions. Jeremy?
Well, I'm in the same boat. I don't really know much about the theory either, other than it's for families. But what I was curious about was what exactly does this theory offer over all the other ones? And can any of the principles, concepts be applied to individual therapy?
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. Nuri?
I three things that I know is three things I don't know about Bowen.
That's a good place to start.
I would say I believe that it's because I don't know. It's because maybe there's not a lot of popularity with it right now. It's not being even though we're in the school and we're talking about it now. It's just growing now, and like you said before in your introduction, it was available many years ago, and now it's when it's coming back. You mentioned that it's an effective family therapy. And the one thing, those are the two things, but mostly I don't know anything about Bowen, but I am very interested. I like to learn, of course. And the thing that I would like to learn the most with my other colleagues here is how to use the Bowen therapy with families in therapeutic sessions.
Okay. All right, so fair questions. I hope that I can answer some of those during the presentation. So let's see, I'm gonna share the screen again to go back to the presentation. So what brings me here with you today? So I come from Washington. What happened with my animation? It's out of order. I come from Washington via satellite, getting to you guys. And what brings me to you today, it's my desire to share a way of conceptualizing human behavior. So this is very ambitious. It's not a technique for therapy, is not an understanding of like a small piece of information about human family. It's a way to conceptualize human behavior in general. So that's pretty broad. I would like to contribute in the building of the science of human behavior. We have so many theories or so many methods and so many models and so many perspectives, and you go from strategic to structural to narrative to postmodern and all these different views. And I found that Bowen theory is the one that is best grounded in science, best grounded in facts about human functioning, which would make it the science of human behavior. Or that was at least the attempt of Dr. Bowen when he defined his theory. He said, I want to develop a theory or to make Bowen theory towards, move it towards the science of human behavior. So really to make it a science, something that can be observable, something objective, rather than just a way of trying to deal with families that are difficult. So it is a pretty large in scope. And yet, Dr. Bowen was able to bring all those factors into a series of concepts that are manageable, and that together and in interaction with each other, these concepts can explain very well the functioning of humans in families. And I would like to share a theory, that's the third point there, a theory that has resulted key in guiding my own life, my own personal life, and guiding my professional life. So it's just that I'm so excited about it that I like to share it. So let's see, what is Bowen theory? Bowen theory is not a psychological perspective. It's not a psychological perspective is the best thing I can say. It is not a technique about family theory, and it's not a theory about psychopathology. Bowen theory is a theory about the interaction of variables that produce variance in the functioning of human beings. So it's a theory about in what ways we are different and what accounts for those differences. What variables are involved in creating such a wide range of functioning within the human species, let's say. So why some people can function well and be ordered in their life and have less symptoms and be more resilient and more adaptable, and why there's the other end of the spectrum, people who have life difficulties that they can hardly function, that they cannot reproduce, they cannot have a productive life, cannot establish relationships that are meaningful, and everything in between. So this theory accounts for the whole range of behavior, from those who function poorly to those who function better, and that's what it studies. Just a little bit of history here, so we can get oriented to who this man was. So Murray Bowen was born in Tennessee in a farm, and he was in constant contact with nature since he was a kid. He lived in this farm. They had animals, and they had some how do you call it? Sembraban the crops and what. I'm not from the countryside, so I don't even have the vocabulary. But he was very close to nature, so he knew firsthand the rhythms of nature, and he observed that. He was the oldest of 5 brothers. He studied medicine, and then he went to during the Second World War. He was a doctor and went to Europe for a time, and then back to the U.S. And he served 5 years for the army. From this experience, that he at the beginning he wanted to be a surgeon, but after that experience in World War II, he changed his interest and he wanted to study psychiatry. So he wanted to understand what happened with these people that after such an experience began having difficulties and problems. So 1951, he went to, before 51, he went to Menninger, the foundation in Kansas, and his training was mainly psychoanalytic. So that was his psychiatric training. In 51, he became in charge of a small unit at the Menninger Clinic in Topeka. And in that clinic, he wanted to understand what are the possible origins, family origins of schizophrenia. So not only him, but other psychologists and psychiatrists were also trying to figure out what was the role of the family in the development of schizophrenia. So that's when the family movement began. He was not the only one. Other people were also thinking about this. A few years later, he developed a research project at NIMH, which is National Institute of Mental Health here in Baltimore, Maryland. Bethesda, Maryland. And this research was 3-4 years long. This was a unique research in that he thought, well, if schizophrenia has to do with the relationship with the mother, I want to have the mother and the person with schizophrenia together in my ward so I can observe them. So he invited mother and their daughters with schizophrenia to live in the ward. And then they observed the mother-daughter interaction 24 hours, basically. But after a couple of, I think a year or a little bit more, he observed that there was a piece missing. And he thought, well, the piece that is missing here is the interaction with the father. What happens with the father and with the rest of the family? So at the end, he had 11 families that were living in the hospital ward. Of course, they could come in and go, and it was very flexible, but they were able, him and his research team were able to observe and record the behavior, the reactions, the fluctuation in functioning, when it was better, when a group was doing worse, in these 11 families with a schizophrenic member. So that's his famous NIMH research project. He also had, and they were in this ward for prolonged periods of time. If you think that now hospitalizations are like 2 weeks and that sounds long, well, this was, people were there for years. I think a couple were there for 3 years. And so he really had a sense of not only the acute moment or the acute manifestation of schizophrenia, but a very wide range of observations from the almost normal to the acute, and how the relationship with the family had to do with this fluctuation. He also had several outpatient families. I think there were 7 participating in the research that didn't live there, but they were also part of the research. And then he also had the opportunity to see people with other set of problems in the outpatient clinic, and he observed how they function in relation to their family. So in 1975, he founded the families. No, hold on. Let me see. It sounds like I'm missing a page here. What happened is, well, then he went, I don't know what happened with that bullet point. But anyway, he then went to Georgetown University, and that's why he is linked to Georgetown. And then he founded his center in the area of Georgetown, so that's why people think about Bowen and Georgetown University. But he was the head of the psychiatric area for a number of years, and he continued having research projects at Georgetown University. Then in '75, he founded the Bowen the center in Georgetown, and then he eventually he went away or got independent from the university, and he moved the center outside the university. And there he was the director for a number of years until 1990 when he died. And then Michael Kerr, who was one of his very close collaborators, colleagues, he became the director until 2011 when Dr. Anna McKnight got the position of director and Dr. Kerr retired. So the Bowen theory can be thought of as part of the, there's the Bowen Center in Georgetown, and here's Dr. Bowen with Virginia sat here. So he was very much a part of the family movement during the decades of the 60s and the 70s, and when all these people began to think about the importance of the family and moved away from the individual thinking. And he had close contact with many of the founders of the different schools, and but he maintained a different position in many ways, and he wanted to develop his own ideas in relation with other sciences. So he was very interested in reading in biology, neurology, ethology, the study of animals, evolution. So he was very interested in grounding his theory in science. So now the Bowen Center is the center of where we do research and we study the theory and its applications. Let's see. I'm gonna stop now. So what was that Bowen was able to see? What was the new thing, the discovery, so to speak, that he made? The discovery and the key aspect of his theory is that the family is an emotional unit. And And if you think about that, it is mind-boggling. An emotional unit, an organism. So we are not independent, autonomous individuals, that get in touch with others and then form families in that way. It's one organism. It's like our body with all the pieces and the pancreas and the heart and the brain, but it's one organism. So this is pretty radical to think about the family as an emotional unit, a unit where one part regulates the functioning of the other and is regulated by the other. So that interaction at the most profound level was what he observed, beginning with his research at NIMH with these families with a schizophrenic member. He was able to see, because they were so low functioning, maybe it was easier to watch how these members affected each other in such a profound way. What happened to one affected immediately the way the others reacted. He also discovered that there is variation from one family to the next in terms of the level of independence of its members. So let me go back so I can make some contact here. So there are families that seem to be so interconnected and so interdependent that there's no way that one member can move without moving the other member. There's no way, there's little air between them. They have to think the same, do the same, like the same things, behave in the same ways. And if one is different than the others, then difficulties arise and conflicts arise, and there's no room to be different. There are other families that are interconnected, but in a little looser way, where there's a little more room for one individual to be a little different, to have different interests, different positions, different perspectives. And he observed that everybody, all of us, fall in that spectrum, from the tightest to the loosest, let's say. And we all fall in that continuum. That was the other thing that he observed, is that variance, that we are all in a continuum. There's no such thing as functioning like the, how do they call it sometimes, the dysfunctional family and the functional family. We are all part of that continuum, and we move a little bit better at times, a little bit worse at times. At difficult times, we all look very messy. If you think about yourself and in a difficult time when there's a lot of anxiety, there's an emergency, that we all look pretty messy. And we can all look pretty well when we are in an environment, in a context where things are stable and different characteristics. But we can look very well or we can look very poorly. Of course, there's a range. And each individual and each family has a different range. So the way I think about it is that I have a range, and I can look very bad up to a point or very good up to a point, and I cannot move away from those brackets. And other people have a different level of a degree of variation. So I think those are the two things that he observed that are key to keep in mind when you work in families. One, that the family is one organism. Yes, you can talk to one individual. One individual can make an effort to get better and do things for self. True. But the interconnectedness is so profound that we need to think about it as a multi-generational organism. And if we take that idea to the extreme, we could say that it's actually only one family, it's one organism where the pieces come in and out. They are born and die, but it's one organism through history, if you will. So if you think, let's just take a little, to make an artificial breakpoint, 4 generations of a family. It's one organism. Just the individual members are changing, but there's something of a continuity in that family. So that's a pretty difficult idea to keep in mind at times, particularly in this world where we emphasize so much the power of the individual and the fantasy that we are independent from each other and that you can do anything you want in your life. I think that's not true. And so that the fact that it's one organism and the fact that there's variance in the functioning and we all fall in that spectrum. Those are two things that he was able to observe. I'm going to go back to my slides. Okay, so it's like, what happened? Wrong way. So you've all seen this, right? That's Dr. Seuss. And I am going to tell you how he describes this picture that I think speaks about this interconnectedness and how it's impossible to tease out who's who. And so I'm going to say it in English. It says, speaking of horns that are a bit queer, I'll bring back a very good odd family dear. A father, a mother, two sisters, a brother, whose horns are connected from one to the other, whose horns are so mixed they can't tell them apart, can't tell where they end, and can't tell where they start. Each deer's mighty puzzled. He's never yet found if his horns are hairs or others way round. So just a picture to keep in mind. Really, it's difficult to know where it begins and where it ends. So let's see. Are you familiar? I can see you, so I know you cannot see me, but I can see you. Are you familiar with a family diagram? Just raise your hand if you are. Yeah, okay, Jeremy and yeah, okay. So let me take a minute to talk about the family diagram. Dr. Bowen came with this idea that then others took off with, and like Monica McGoldrick and others, and made developed these ideas further. But the idea of making a diagram, and some people call it the genogram, but he preferred the word diagram. He thought it was more accurate. To put in one place, in one image, who is this organism? And who's part of this organism? What are the parts that compose this big organism, this emotional unit? And when I say emotional, why does he say emotional unit and not just the family is a unit? It's an emotional unit because the word emotional, he uses it not to describe a feeling state. It's not about being loved or feeling happy, or those are feelings. But when he describes emotion, he goes back to a more basic level, to more the automatic aspect of us all. So for now, I would like you to think about emotional as equated with instinct. Like, is that instinctual part? We are a unit, a family is a unit, but at a very instinctual level. It's not a conviction. It's not that I decide to be part of this unit. It's my being at the very core, very basic, very hardwired level is it's a unit with the others, and we form one organism. So it's very basic. That's why he calls it emotional unit. Thinking about emotions as coming from a older part of the brain compared to the cerebral cortex that would bring up the thinking and the cognition. The emotion comes from a more basic and more automatic aspect of us all. So anyway, a way to put together in one diagram all that, he came up with this idea. So squares are males, circles are females, the straight line is a marriage, and if there's a relationship without a marriage, you would put a dotted line. So there are many ways to code details for the family. So in this case, the red is the nuclear family of a father and mother, an older sister, and a younger brother. Then the blue one is father and mother with 3 sisters. And then the new nuclear family would be the red square, which is the husband, the blue circle, which is the mother, and an older sister. Always oldest go on the left side and youngest on the right side. So older sister, middle brother, and then youngest brother. So this would be one emotional unit, right? A unit that sort of has a common skin, let's put it that way. It's like living under the same skin, the same principles, the same style of relating, the same intensity in connections, the same perspective towards life. So there's so many common things. And again, there's a variance. There are families that are more into the same sameness, and there are families that might be more tolerant for differences. So that's one nuclear family. Then we have the second emotional unit. These two families don't know each other. They're separate. But then when a marriage happens or a long-term relationship happens, the new nuclear family is formed with the influence of both of these families of origin. So you cannot think about the green family as being totally independent from the red or from the blue. We all are your maternal and your paternal families of origin have a lot to do with your nuclear family in the present. And that's why the considering the multi-generational family is key, because this is one organism. It's not separate. Some families have more influence than others, but we are all influenced at the end of the day by our families of origin. And they have a lot to do with the way we develop our own green family, let's say, if you're at the stage of developing your own family. So what do you bring from each of them? In terms of the emotional way of functioning, not only traditions is one thing that's more of at the cultural level, which also happens, but what I'm referring to is the deep way in which we are programmed to relate to others. Do we relate more closely? Do you use more distance? Are you very sensitive to certain cues? Are you more flexible or are you more rigid? All those things that inform the way we relate to others, and not only in the family but elsewhere, comes from these impact from families of origin to the nuclear family. So let's make a pause here, and here, I'm gonna do this. Stop sharing. So here. What are your reactions so far to these ideas? Jeremy.
Well, it's a little confusing because it is a whole new perspective to look at the family unit. But now a question that I'm processing is, what would the theory say for an individual from one of the emotional units that they detach and they eliminate contact from the emotional unit that they came from?
Yeah.
That's what I'm wondering.
Okay, well, that's a phenomenon that is called cutoff, and that's one of the concepts within this theory. Now, the idea is that it is a denial of the influence of the family of origin when somebody does that. So we all move away from our families slowly, and then, we might maintain some connection, but we develop our own lives, that's for sure. We don't stay as involved as when we were 3 or 4, right? Now, this natural separation from the family of origin and developing of your own life can happen in a more subtle and smooth way, or would happen in an abrupt way. So if you are very, very attached to something and you need to move, because you have in yourself that pull towards individuation, that pull towards becoming your own self, that pull towards developing your own life. But if you're so tight, you have to make such a rip yourself away from that family. And that's what when you see people that are all of a sudden go to college and never come back again, or move to the other side of the country and seldomly call parents, or they call only in regular visits that are a little bit of a requirement more than a desire to be in connection. Because if they come back, they are sucked by the emotional unit. So instead of slowly moving away, developing your own self, your own life, but maintaining that capacity to reconnect, you rip yourself away. And that phenomena would be called cutoff. But the cutoff underneath has an attachment that was not resolved. Because if you think about somebody that said, no, I'm not going back to my hometown during Christmas because I cannot stand my mother, she's impossible. So the mother still has that impact on the person so much that she's almost guiding the person's life in a reverse way. But the connection is there so strong that the person is governed in a way by the mother, by the relationship with the mother. So it's not as free as this person might think. So there is an attachment that was not resolved to give way to that individual to become his own person. And that's the phenomena of ripping away or cutting off. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? The problem is that ripping off in that way has its own set of problems over time. At the beginning, it feels great because you're finally done with that mother who was impossible.
As a matter of fact, Dr. Martinez, you did answer one of the questions that I was going to give with Jeremy's question, where families are separated. You mentioned the cutoff and the abrupt form. For example, families that come from Cuba, that a lot of times, unfortunately, due to politics, they come to this country, or Venezuela, or Mexico, or any country. They come to the United States of America and leave the majority of the family behind. But you really enlightened me on that subject. Thank you.
And there's so many reasons why that leave families apart. It's not necessarily that they are running away from the relationship, but something about the reality of the circumstances and whatnot. But how can they maintain that connection with the family of origin? If they maintain it, even if it's impossible to do it physically now, it's so easy. But maybe 100 years ago you left and you left. But how within your own family, to what extent do you recognize the importance of those connections, or you behave as if you are not, those relationships were not important? So it's not, it is subtle because it's not only about measuring kilometers or miles between people or how many times a year they see each other. There could be a cutoff by somebody that is living in the same household, and is somebody that just shuts down, doesn't communicate, just can't stand each other. So it's not only about distance, but yes, moving away creates opportunities, but it also creates problems. Mm-hmm. Somebody else?
We have a new student who arrived, and he's going to introduce himself.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Marcos, and I graduated here last year. So I have been working with grieving, and is why I'm here, because I want to understand better about Bowen and how, if he worked with grieving process or not, because I'm dealing with a lot of families, and sometimes they get destroyed, after, or the main one for the family die, or even though a couple that lost the child, they can't stay together any longer. So this is one of the reasons that I want to be here. But thank you.
Yeah. let me see how I can answer that. One of the things, of the events that disturb the equilibrium in a family group, one of the most important ones is the coming or the leaving of individual members. So, of course, somebody dying leaves the family system, and that creates a disequilibrium within the system, and people have to adapt to that. Some adapt better than others, but it's always a change to adapt to. But I can say the same for children who are born into a family, or somebody marrying and bringing a new in-law into the family system. That somebody coming in can be as impactful, I don't know if that word exists, to the family as somebody leaving. So I would think about that not only as losing a family member, which is of course very disturbing, but what is disturbing is the change in the configuration of the family, the change of roles. Before, somebody would take responsibility now, for example, for the meals, and now that person dies, now somebody else has to step up and take responsibility. So the roles are changed. Or the other way around. You used to do the meals, and then all of a sudden comes this daughter-in-law, and she's a very good cook, and now she starts making the meals. So the responsibilities change. So anytime there's a change in who's part of that family unit, it disturbs the family, and some families are better at adapting to that. What would determine the capacity of the family to adapt, better or worse, has to do with two factors that I'll be talking about today: levels of differentiation and levels of anxiety. And those two factors will determine to what extent the family can adapt to that very important event. Mm-hmm. So let's, for the next, think about a family that you can have in mind for the rest of the presentation. You might have all of these images coming to your mind of different families, your own, or families you know, or in your work, but try to focus on one. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to, in a piece of paper or wherever you're taking notes, make us a quick diagram. Let me set the diagram that I had before, just for you to make a quick diagram of the family you want to keep in mind today. Take 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be complete, but just think about a family, and if you can include 2 generations, that would be great, and keep that in mind for the presentation as we move on. It can be your own, it can be your friends. Got it? Okay. I'm still working there. All right. So I'm gonna move on and just keep that in mind, and we'll go back to it. Okay, this is a basic tenet of the theory, the concept of togetherness versus individuation. So what Dr. Bowen observed was that human beings, but not only human beings, also other species, operate with two forces, counterbalancing forces. The forces towards togetherness versus the forces of individuation. And these two forces are present and in constant shift in our lives. No one, it's not that togetherness is better than individuation or the other way around. It's the two forces that are operating all the time in our lives. So let's see how it works. The relationships, our relationship with others in our group, is governed by these two forces that are counterbalanced. The force towards togetherness and the force towards individuality. So here you see the picture of a group of zebras that are, maybe they smelled or they heard, I don't know how they captured that there's a lion around, and they communicated to each other and they grouped together. And they grouped together in a way that they erase, I don't know if that's the exact word, obliterate, I think is the word in English too, the difference between them. If you sort of not pay too much attention and see it as a flock, you have difficulty seeing where one individual starts and when the other one ends. It's like one organism, like one big group, big thing there. So that the lion might be a little confused of who's where and has more difficulty attacking. It's easier to picture someone like the zebra that is on its own over here on the right. That's easier to picture where it starts, where it ends, and it's just an individual. Over there, the forces towards togetherness blend differences between individuals in a way that is useful and adaptive in certain ways. But if the zebras stay together like that, touching each other 24 hours a day, they couldn't even move to find their food or water or whatever. There's a force that at some point pushes individuals apart, like the one on your right, to have the freedom and the capacity to go toward their own goal. I need water, I need food, I need rest, or whatever they need. And the individual can be more goal-oriented. So these two forces are instinctual forces. They're part of us as a species. It's not that we choose we choose it. It's part of the way we are. What are the characteristics of groups where the force of unity or of togetherness is activated? And what are the characteristics of individuality when the individuality force is activated? So let's read what there's under unity or togetherness. There's more interdependence, people doing things for each other. Don't think about it good or bad, it's just the way it is. There's more cooperation. There's more pressure to be the same, to be in agreement, to be uniform. So you think in a political group, there's the pressure to think the way the others in the group think, and you don't have the freedom, so to speak, to think differently or to disagree. You have to be in agreement. It would be characterized by symbiosis, one eating the other for survival. It's characterized in humans by pursuit of acceptance, approval, love, like those are the motives that keep people in the togetherness. That's what is important for somebody. It's more the relationship is what's important in that state. Togetherness is also characterized by some being responsible for others and expecting others to be responsible for self. So it's more of a sharing of responsibilities, if you will, where I'm hoping that my husband, brings the dinner to the table, and then he's expecting for me to bring the water in a way. I no, that was a very bad example because that's more of a cooperation. But that in a family where they are very much in the togetherness position, I have a teenage son, and I feel responsible for waking him in the morning when he's 18, as if that was my responsibility. So I'm taking on responsibility that shouldn't be mine at this point. But I expect the other to do things for me as well, instead of each taking care of self. Now, what are the characteristics of individuality? There's more autonomy, so individuals can behave and function without the presence of the other. There's more separation. There's more room for difference. People or individuals like this zebra is oriented towards goals. So you have a goal that you want to attain, and you can be oriented towards that goal and be focused on that. People tend to be more productive, and people are governed more by principles than by the emotions of the moment. So people who have a little more clear idea of how they want to guide their lives versus just this guided by the emotion of the moment, and I do what it feels like to do, rather than I do what I think I want to do and I have decided that I want to do. So these two forces. Oh, where's my pictures? I had very nice pictures. Hold on. And see if I put them elsewhere. Why did they go all the way to 36? Hold on. It got misplaced. But this is a good example. When anxiety is high, the togetherness force is activated. So when somebody dies, when there's a crisis, the togetherness force is necessary and is activated. And when I know why I put it here. When things are a little calmer, you can take the time and the energy to have your own goals, and you're not as worried about the group as you are when the togetherness force. Well, let me stop there with that idea. Do you have any questions about this principle of togetherness versus individuality? No, I can see you guys. So if you raise your hand, I can see you. Okay. I'll keep going. So this is the theory. Oh, well, think about the family before I move on. Think about the family that you made the diagram about. And think to what extent this family operates more like a conglomerate, like another way that Dr. Bowen described it is the undifferentiated ego mass. So to what extent this looks like a lump of people, and they are sort of moved together and in unison, or to what extent this family that you're thinking of has more room for individuals having different goals. That's a way to think about this in real life. If you want to comment either way and give an example of what you observe in the family you're thinking about. Stop sharing. There. No? Does anybody have an example of either the force of togetherness or individuality being evident? Jeremy.
Well, I think I have more of a question, but I'm noticing that with my family, it's a mix, but between individuals. I don't see the whole unit being either tight or loose. I see each individual having, how do I say, condition.
Having what?
Uh, a different condition. Some of the individuals have that freedom to be more of an individual, but others in the unit are more constricted.
I think that's a brilliant observation because it is true that within families, there is variance. Some individuals seem to be more trapped, if you will, by the web of the family, and some are a little freer to go about, and there's more room for them to move. And I think that that has less to do with the personality, quote unquote, of somebody than with the position they play or the position they have within the system. So that's what we call the functional position. So some functional positions are more people are more trapped and more interdependent, and some others are more independent. Now that said, there is a range, and the family as a whole can be observed with a certain level of balance between these two forces in general. So it's like if we think about numbers, it's like the family has a 5 in this balance between togetherness and with the light. I got all dark all of a sudden, right? Let me get the lights on. Yeah. So there's like they have a 15 of a number, just arbitrary number. Some individuals within that family can go down as low as 45, and in terms of independence, and some can go a little bit over 55. So there is a variance within a group, but there is some coherence. People don't differ that much as one would think within a family group. But in fact, some tend to be more affected, if you will, or moved towards being a little more independent, and some towards being more interdependent. Mm-hmm. And in the example that you're thinking of, can you identify a behavior of one individual that speaks about togetherness and a behavior of an individual that speaks to individuality?
The one that is representing togetherness would be the mother. The one representing the individual would be the son.
So how do you see, what's the mother doing that you consider her as being more into the togetherness?
The mother's, most of her family is alive, and they're within a similar age group. Mm-hmm. And they, from what I know, they tend to socialize, communicate frequently, especially during the holidays. However, the son, he is vastly younger. He is the youngest person in the family. And he has very little connection to the previous generations.
Okay. Oh wait, I mean that's a good example. I would wonder if that distance is real individuality or is disconnect. So it depends. There's subtleties there, and I don't know the details. But a way of thinking about this is, where does your life energy goes towards? Is your life energy going towards maintaining those connections and making other people feel feel happy and not upsetting anybody else or having others to do for self, and just is your life energy towards the relationship oriented, or is your life energy goal oriented? And that doesn't mean that you isolate and live in the top of the mountain, but you can be in relationship with someone without losing sight of where you want to go. So that's a way of thinking about togetherness and individuality. Where is your life energy directed towards? So, share screen again. So this is the theory in a nutshell, okay? The theory has 8 concepts and 2 variables. These are the 8 concepts. I'm just gonna mention them. Differentiation of self, triangles, the process of emotional processing in the nuclear family, family projection process, multi-generational transmission process, sibling position, cutoff, and societal emotional process. So these are the 8 concepts that constitute the theory. And with these 8 concepts, you can describe a family and how it functions and explain the problems that they're having and figure out what are the ways out from that life problem. There are 2 variables that are that cross all these concepts. One variable is level of differentiation of self, and notice that it's also number 1, differentiation of self. It can be considered a concept or a variable. A variable in the sense that some families have more and some families have less. So that's the variable. In what ways it varies in the degree of differentiation. And then the other variable is the level of anxiety, of chronic anxiety in the family. And again, it's a variable because there are families that have less, there are families that have more. And it's also a variable because at some point in one particular family, there's less anxiety, and then things happen and there's more anxiety. So that's why it varies. So the theory has 8 concepts and 2 variables. And I will not be able to present to you all of this information in one session, but I just wanted for you to have the idea of what comprises the theory. And if you have all these elements in mind, you can understand, and ideally you can predict within limits what happens in a family. An experiment or a study that Dr. Bowen did at one point, which I wish we could do it again, was so interesting. He had some families, the history of some families with, I think, 3 or 4 generations. So he studied this nuclear family. Let me stop sharing here. He studied this family and then 2 or 3 generations up. And then he took the original families and gave that information to the researchers. Now, I don't know if that they were 4 generations or just 2, but it doesn't matter. He gave the information of the generation 1 to the researchers and said, what do you predict is going to happen in this family? Who in this, if I give you this information about how this family is constituted, who in the family is going to have the most life problems and who's going to be freer and have a better life trajectory? And so then the researchers made the predictions, and if they were guided by the theory, they were very much able to predict what happened for the next generations. So that's the predictability of things. So if you have this family with these characteristics, with this level of anxiety, with this a brother and a sister and a younger brother, and somebody was sick, or whatever information you can tell about that family, you can't predict how it's gonna affect the next generation. So that's the predictability strength of this theory. Considering these 8 elements, 8 concepts, and 2 variables. So, but because the scope of this talk is more to illustrate a clinical application of the theory, I'm not gonna describe any more about this. Let's say, except, what do I have here? Yeah. So how do we apply Bowen theory in the clinical context? Why is this useful? Why knowing these 8 concepts and thinking about these 2 variables important in the clinical work? The thing is that Bowen didn't say how to do therapy. Well, he only offered some guidance, theoretical guidance that would lead clinical application. So it's not a method. He didn't construct a method of psychotherapy. But he says if you know the theory, if you know how this organism operates, what makes it tick, what makes it work, what affects its functioning, you're able to deduct how to intervene to make this, to help this family or this system work better. So it's all about the theory, not about the techniques. I can think of any techniques or 2 or 3 things that are usually applied, but the main thing is the theory and how to think about this family. The contribution which was most important for clinicians, it's a way of thinking about the family. So it is very difficult, very different if you think about the family as a unit than if you think the family as just a group of individuals. That in itself changes the way you intervene. For example, Marcus, when you were thinking about grieving, it's very different if you think about the family as a unit that had a loss and they're trying to adapt to that loss and to reorganize themselves, than to focus on the sadness of the wife who lost the husband and that is the problem. It is very different. And the questions you will ask are different. And so that's why the theory is the one leads the interventions. It's not a series of techniques to implement. And some people talk about Bowenian therapy. I mean, it's just a word, but I don't think there's such thing as Bowenian therapy. It's Bowen theory, and if you guide your thinking and use that as a blueprint to observe the family, then you're doing Bowen clinical work based on Bowen theory. Okay, so sorry to burst the bubble, but there's I think that is why it's not as popular, if you will, Bowen theory within the therapy world, because you really need to learn the theory if you want to intervene with this, rather than just get some tricks if you know under your sleeve to use with families. And I wanted to include this quote by Kurt Lewin that says, "There's nothing more practical than a good theory." And I think that really applies here. So let's see the 8 concepts and the 2 variables. And I'm going to describe differentiation of self, which is the cornerstone concept of the theory. So that's where I'm going to be describing right now. Questions so far? Okay, hold on, I can't see. Stop screen. Anybody question, comment? No. Okay.
No questions.
No questions. All right. Just raise your hand. We're so few that it's very easy to monitor this. So just you can raise your hand and intervene. Differentiation. What is this differentiation of self? And we've been already talking about this for a while. Oy. So a way of thinking about differentiation is as the level of maturity of individuals. It's a concept that puts together many characteristics. It's like it's a scale. It's a continuum. On one end, there are less differentiated individuals and families, and on the other end, there's more individuated individuals and families. So families that are more interdependent and there's less autonomy, and there are families where there's more autonomy among their members. So in the family that you think that you use for your exercise today, think about a person that you can consider most mature in that family group, and circle that person, and then circle the person who you would consider less mature or more immature. So think about a moment about who would be the most mature and who would be less mature. And then think about what you observe and write 1, 2, 3, 5, however many characteristics of the most mature person, how this person has faced life, what are the type of problems they present, what is their life trajectory in general, over time, like how they face life, and see if you can describe some characteristics of the most mature and the least mature. So let's see, who would like to share what sort of characteristics made you think of somebody more mature and less mature? Okay, Nori.
Okay, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I'm going to give you what I thought in the nucleus that I developed here. The immature person is silent, is also always joking.
It's also what? I'm sorry?
Always joking.
Uh-huh.
It's uncaring. Uncaring. I'm sorry. Relaxed. And now I forgot what I wrote here. No. I'm sorry, I don't know what I wrote, the last one that I wrote.
That's okay.
I missed one. But the person that was mature in the family that I've been thinking of, and this is an actual family that I work with in a clinical setting. The mature person is a survivalist, is very serious, is goal-oriented, is very cautious, yet they're always struggling. Do you want
Always
what
struggling with
always
that?
struggling? Do you want the
Okay.
positions? Like where in the family they fall?
Yeah.
Okay. The unmature is actually the father,
Uh-huh.
and the mature is the youngest son.
Huh. Okay.
That's my interpretation.
Okay. So
They're opposites.
they're opposites, and I think that you mentioned, for example, in the immaturity, the lack of emotional regulation. When somebody's joking all the time, I think about that as lack of emotional regulation. The when it's uncaring, I think about somebody hoping that the other one take care of self and do what their responsibility. So irresponsibility there. When you say silent, I think about distancing, not being able to connect because you need that distance. I think the more mature, when you say go cautious, I was thinking about capacity to assess reality. When one, I don't know if it's extra cautious, but that's the what came to mind. That's a characteristic of somebody more mature is able to assess reality in a better way. But I think you're right that it doesn't. Maturity doesn't excuse you or gets you off the possibility of having difficulties. So it's not about that. It's not about having or not difficulty, but how you adapt to life. Thank you, Mary. Let's hear somebody else, and then I'll explain what I needed this for. Jeremy.
Okay, for me, the most mature, he is well established, an older generation. He has a line of success. He recently retired. He behaves well mannered. And the least mature for me was distant, unsure where to proceed in his life, unaware of his life goals, stubborn, spiteful even.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think about they begin to sound similar, right? Like they mature, the distance and the silence. It's so because people have difficulty tolerating the relationship, the unsureness, and the having lack of goals. That's very important because the energy is not directed towards moving on in life. It's just to be able to manage the moment by moment. Versus somebody that has success, is well established, is retired, there's some order, there's some planning, there's some looking to the future, there's some reality testing there. So yeah. Okay, thank you. Rosana, do you want to say what you have?
For me, the mature one is hard worker, responsible. She is the, how can I say it? She gets the family together as well. She takes care of the family, of the members of the family. The immature is not as responsible, takes everything as a joke. I can't think of something.
I think you mentioned one that we haven't touched on in the mature side, which is that person who gets the family together. I think what you're picking up on is the capacity to relate to others in a way that a more mature person can have more relationship with different members in the family. It's more open to have this relationship with different members because this person is sure of self. They don't have to they can relate to different people without having to change them or without being annoyed by the way they are. They just are who they are, and they can have this open relationship with others. And that tends to bring people back to become leaders emotionally too. So I think that's another characteristic of somebody mature, the capacity to establish long-standing relationships. Mm-hmm. How about you, Mark? Marcus. I was gonna say Mauricio. Marcus.
Oh, it's a family that I also, well, I used to see in the office. I'm going to talk about brothers. The mature one, he's a decision maker. He always makes decisions for his own life. And he's a very care person. He's always caring about everybody. He is always able to make his life goes forward. You know, he doesn't get stuck in excuse or blaming people, especially blame someone for the family. And he's a good listener. He listens to everybody. And the other one, actually, it's amazing to see that they belong to the same family. But he's always fighting, and he makes decision based just in his own opinion. He doesn't ask anybody, but he's very powerful in the family at the same time. This is why one of the reasons that I ask you about death and dying, because this one, the aggressive one, he is the one who is kind of replacing the father. You know, it's a big family. They are 5. And he's very unhappy. He's very aggressive. He's always irritated. He's always stressed. And we see a lack of love. You know, nobody say that love him, but people fears him. You know, it's not that they take his opinion because they like him. It's because of the controlling.
So he antagonizing. I think you mentioned in the mature person some characteristics that were repeated, but one is the capacity to adapt. You say that he always finds a way to move forward in his life. So
without
people
blaming, you know.
Yeah, without blaming and taking on the responsibility that belongs to him, and then finding ways to adapt and to move forward. Versus blaming, pointing, fighting, being controversial. That's a more immature position. But I think you also point out that it's not always that family might be more. You say this person has some power there because he's taking the position of the father who died. So it's not guaranteed that the more mature person. In the short run, let me put this caveat. I think in the short run, they might look like they don't have much to say, but as time goes by, people appreciate that maturity and tend to gravitate around them more than whoever has this supposed power at some point, but time will tell.
Okay. Thank you.
So these are great characteristics. I think that you do pick up on many of the characteristics. And if you think about differentiation, a way of thinking about it is less mature and more mature. And let me see here. So I'm going to show you here. Oh, this went the other way around. Okay. This is the scale of differentiation that goes from more differentiation towards less differentiation. So, and I think I did it the other way around. It doesn't matter. On the plus side is more levels of differentiation, people being more autonomous, people being more, I'm just going to use that word, differentiated. And on the right-hand side, less differentiated, okay? So what are the characteristics of someone who's more differentiated? People are more flexible and adaptable. They're more autonomous. They're less vulnerable to be contagious by the anxiety of others. So they're less vulnerable to respond based on whatever's going on. They have a more solid position. They're more capable of defining and sustaining their own ideas, their own beliefs, and their own principles. And they don't have to fight it with anybody. They just know what they think. And they can communicate it, but they don't impose them to others, but they know what they think. They have usually less symptoms, and when symptoms arise, they're less severe and they are less chronic. They have more capacity to self-regulation, and I think you described that very nicely in the mature description of the people you described. Self-regulation. You said, Marcus, you said at the end that this person was a good listener. To be a good listener, you need to be able to regulate yourself emotionally and quiet yourself to be able to listen. And they're more capable of maintaining relationships that are open, adult to adult or person to person, and more long-standing. On the other side of the spectrum, the less differentiated people are more vulnerable to difficulties and pressures, so more vulnerable to anxiety, what happens, and they tend to change more depending on the context. They have more energy that is geared toward the other or put on the other, and to seek for their attention, their approval, to fulfill others' expectations, and to be very much aware of others' upset. So if my mother is going to be upset about this, I'm not going to be doing it. So you're moved by how the others are reacting, what the others expect from you. You also have high expectations of others, and then you define your own behavior based on the other did or didn't do this for me. When in the clinical world you hear it as, my needs are not met in this relationship. He doesn't listen and I'm upset and he doesn't ask me why I'm upset. So I'm expecting the other to behave in certain ways. It depends more, people depend more on others for their well-being and their self-regulation. I need him to be here so I can calm down. Or I need her presence. For example, I have this father that they're separated and he says, when I'm without my kids, I don't know what to do. I just can't figure out what to do with myself. I feel so lonely and I need the kids to be here. So he needs the kids to regulate himself. There's more dependence on others to define their beliefs, their attitudes, feelings, and actions. So it's more like reading on others what I should be doing and thinking and feeling. There's more symptoms, they're more intense, and they're more chronic. And in general, the emotion is the principle that governs their lives versus thinking or goals. So people that describe to me, my family loves the chaos, loves the cray. There's this woman that is so funny. She says, they love the cray, and she means that the crazy. So for her, that's the mother of her family, and that's what moved them. And the emotions and the craziness, what she calls craziness, the quarreling and the yelling, and that's what governs their everyday life. So these are the two extremes and everything in between, okay? So that's the scale of differentiation. So when we work on ourselves or our families, it's important to figure out where we are in this continuum and what are the style that we have in governing our own lives. So we all can fit in this continuum. So the goal of the therapy based on Bowen theory would be to increase differentiation of self. How can I aid this family to move up in the level of differentiation, to become more mature, each individual and the family as a whole? So based on, now I put it reverse here. Oh dear. Here the low is on the right and the next slide, the low is on the left, so don't be confused. Oh, yes. There. Based on the observations of the INMH, the research project, Dr. Bowen was able to determine that everybody, we all fall in this continuum in respect to the capacity to function in an autonomous way and to guide our lives based on intentionality. So the less differentiation, there's less autonomy, you are dependent more on others in terms of what happens to you. As I was saying, if she gets upset, then I don't do this. That's not being very autonomous. I do this because I think it's important, and if she gets upset, well, we'll have to deal with that. That's a more autonomous decision, and more intentional. And of course, this is a hypothetical scale. It's not a matter of putting numbers on anybody. There's not a way to measure these yet. Okay, so this is the process of differentiation from the developmental perspective. So you have the square is the guy, the circle is the woman, okay? So we have these two people that meet. They don't know each other, they meet, and they date. And then they decide to commit to each other, and the second stage, they marry or they live together, and they become a unit, right? So when they commit to this life together, they become a unit, and there's some interdependence, and that's just natural. Then a daughter comes in the red circle, and the daughter is a baby, and she needs a lot the parents for survival. So her level of dependence is almost 100%, right? She wouldn't survive without the care of the mother and the father. So she is in a very symbiotic stage, if you will, very dependent, very embedded in that unit for her survival. But as she grows and goes to school and matures, she begins to separate from that family of origin to develop her own self and who she is, what she wants, what she likes. And then at the end of the stage, she can develop her own life, but she stays connected with that nuclear family, still affects the way she behaves, and they stay connected over time. Now that fusion or that level of connection creates certain level of anxiety. That's just natural. The connection the relationship itself creates tension. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but it's a given of life to create some tension. So that would be the process of differentiation of somebody that is pretty well functioning and pretty well differentiated. Compared to this other diagram, two people meet, then they marry or they live together, but they become like this super unit that they love the same things. They just couldn't be without each other. My stomach hurts if he's not home by 5 o'clock because I need him so much, kind of situation. Here comes the baby, and she's born into an already pretty tight family. She's making some efforts to differentiate and to move into her own, becoming her own person, but it's hard. It's hard to do it because mommy loves her so much that that she wants her to be the same as she was when she was little. So there's still room for her to be different. She wants her to be the same, please supported by the father, of course. Then here comes adolescence and young adulthood, and she sort of decides not to go to college and to stay in the community college because she doesn't want to leave home. So the tiredness in that family is greater, and the level of anxiety that emerges from that fusion is much greater than in the previous example. So this would be a family that is less differentiated, but it's a developmental process. It begins at the same point, let's say. It's a natural process. We all become dependent to our families, but the developmental process leads us to be more autonomous. Some do it better than others. Now it's the same idea, but in pictures. So two people meet, they like each other. Then there's the fusion phase, natural and necessary. But then there's some room for her to go to school, to become her own person, and she develops the energy to live her life and to pursue her own interests. Versus whatever, they're dating over there at the top, but the next day they meet, they know that they're one for the other, and they're going to be married, and I can't wait. After 2 weeks of knowing you, I can't live without you. That kind of boom, fusion in the minute. Then the baby comes, there's this natural fusion, but it is tinted or it's colored by anxiety about what's going on. So is she okay? Is she sick? Maybe she has a fever? And there's some apprehension about the other person. There's a lot of anxiety within that natural symbiotic stage. Then the kid moves on, and mother still takes so much responsibility for the daughter. And what Bowen observed in his research, the forced motherhood. Forced mothering. So she needs to continue providing that care to the child because she feels good about it, and the child acts as if she is unable to do it on herself. So there's more interdependence, less autonomy. And then she goes to college and she can't have the energy to pursue her own goals because she's still sort of hooked with the family. And here are people who either don't call at all because they can handle it, or they communicate with their families 5 times a day. Just example with all the variations, but that's an example of the same process, but with less air in between people. That would be the process of differentiation. So the goal of the therapy is differentiating the self. That's the same old goal that I began with at the beginning. Oh dear, we have 7:30. Oh no, it's 7. My clock wasn't up. So let me stop here for a minute. Comments, ideas. Good. Okay, so what was the other aspect that we said, the other variable in the theory that was very important?
The levels of anxiety.
The levels of anxiety. So differentiation of self is never static. It sort of moves a little bit within a range. And the variable that interacts with that is the levels of anxiety. So let's see here. Let me just say that differentiation of self is transmitted from generation to generation, staying more or less stable over generations. So if you have a family with arbitrary number of 40 of this level of differentiation, the next generation is not going to be far from that. So we can move, we can improve, we can regress, but the range that is not as great. So that's the multi-generational piece that is important in theory. So now let's talk about anxiety. Anxiety is automatic and is contagious. If you scream fire in a room full of people in the theater, everybody gets all. The more people get scared, the more they infect the others, and everybody panics, right? So it is infection. We are wired for that. So that happens also in the family context. Whoever is tense, is stressed, is let me just use those words, anxious, it gets communicated to others, and we are very good at picking up cues of how others are doing. So anxiety, it's a reaction to threat. It's a physiological reaction, and it's a way to it. It's an adaptive process. So it's built up in us to adapt to the world, and it's very useful. And there are two types of anxiety. Acute anxiety, which is the reaction to a real threat, and it's shorter in duration. And chronic anxiety, when there's a reaction to a imaginary threat, or to the when you're not predicting, but the anticipation of a threat, and that makes you anxious. Yeah, I haven't. My teenage kid hasn't had an accident in the car yet, but I'm anxious because I know it will come. So I anticipate that threat, and it's less grounded in reality, and usually stays activated for longer periods of time. That's why it's chronic. to the point that you don't even feel it very well. You don't know that you're anxious, but it's there. It's a state of arousal of all the stress systems in your body, and they stay sort of on for a long time, either on or in the exhaustion stage. But it's like the reaction to the stress that never stops. So then, of course, we have the underlying, the biological underpinnings of stress. These three authors, McLean, Ledoux, and J. Beer, they talk about this and they explain it very clearly. So one thing that is very important for Bowen theory is to realize that emotions are emerge from the areas of the brain that are called the limbic system, and some argue about the reality of that system, whatever. But they come from a less developed part of our brain in terms of evolution. So, and the cognition is associated with the frontal lobes, which are the newer parts of the brain. When one system is activated, when your frontal lobes are activated, there's less activity in the limbic system. When the limbic system is activated, there's the frontal lobes are less activated. So there seems to have like a switch of on and off between those two systems. So when people are very anxious and emotionally oriented, they're more guided by the limbic system, so to speak. And when people are calmer, can engage the frontal lobe and can engage thinking and planning and assessing reality at a different level. So those are the two systems that interact all the time. And people we hypothesize that people who are more differentiated have more capacity to regulate the emotional piece, and people who are less differentiated are more flooded by the emotional activation. And of course, early experience in growing up have to do with how you learn or develop capacity to regulate these two systems. But emotions can definitely flood intellect, and then you're just moved by your emotions. So that's anxiety. Remember these two forces, the unity or togetherness and individuality. Anxiety is a factor that activates the forces of togetherness. When groups, not only humans, but when individuals are anxious, are scared, there's a fear reaction, the forces of togetherness are activated and we tend to go into groups. When we're calmer, we have more room to be an individual. So that's the picture that I had before. In anxiety moments, we tend to get together and find the comfort of the group and obliterate differences between us, and we can get together to adapt or mourn the moment or something like that. Now, distancing, some people can't tolerate the presence of others in anxious times. So distancing, but in an isolation way, not in going to a moment to reflect, but more of an anxious reaction of I can't see anybody. It's also an activation of the anxiety and has to do with how sensitive I am to others, that I cannot be within in the midst of them. So both this reaction and this reaction has to do with the activation of anxiety and with the increase of anxiety and the activation of the togetherness force. We all move in the continuum of differentiation of self. We have a range, and when we are more anxious, we look less differentiated, and when we are less anxious, we look better and more differentiated. And there's like a mean or a basic level, but we can go beyond certain limits. So that's Even if we're very anxious, we don't go beyond certain limits. So let's see what I have on my list. Okay. Let's put 5 minutes for questions before we go to the clinical case.
They have no questions. They're ready for the case.
Okay. I'm very patient, and I know that sometimes one needs to pause a minute to elaborate. Okay. So what is the goal of Bowen theories? Therapy based on Bowen theory, differentiation of cells, same thing. Okay, oops. So this is the case. This is a JM family. And so this is a family diagram. Do you see my mouse doesn't show there, right? No. Okay. So in green, we have J, born in 72. And in green, we have M, born in 68 on the right. They are married and divorced. They married in 1999. They divorced in 2009. They live in Maryland. They have 2 children, one that was born in 2000 and the girl was born in 2008. So he is now 17 and 9? Mm-hmm. She had a previous relationship on the left with another man. It was not a marriage. She got pregnant and she had an abortion, and that was very significant. For Jay, she is her first marriage. Jay on the left is the oldest of 2 brothers. She has a younger brother. Then parents that are on bold, they divorced. Mother on the dotted lines had another relationship and had a son from that relationship, the last boy there. This was a one-night stand. Then she married to another man in 84. No children from that relationship. Father got, after divorce, he remarried and had, in 86, had a son. So the 2 last half brothers of Jay are almost the same age, 1 year apart, I think. And then he divorced the second wife. So Jay is the oldest of 4 brothers, 1 full brother and 2 half brothers. So he grew up basically with mother and the next brother. He very early took responsibility for that brother and did a lot for him while mother was doing her own thing. Mother was the youngest of 5 brothers and 1 sister. The sister next to her, she committed suicide when she was like 50 years old or so. I don't know much about that family of origin, and I don't know anything about the family of origin of the father. On the side of the mother, M is, so here's another complicated thing. So parents were married. Hold on. Father had this one relationship and had a son in 78. Then he had another relationship and had a son who died in 2016, heart attack. So he was older, he was, I don't know, 50 or so. After having those 2 children, he married M's mom and had M. So she was the oldest of that group of siblings who lived together. Then she had a brother and a sister. And after that sister, parents divorced. Mother was the only child. They are from El Salvador. Father died in 2013. He had pancreatitis, and then he had cancer. So let me get my notes. Give me a second here. So the family comes, the presenting problem is the oldest son. Now, he was 15 when I began seeing them. I've been working with him for a year and a half, a little bit more than that. And they brought him because he had very severe or important depression symptoms. The whole list that you want to hear about depression was there. Let me. Okay, sleep disrupted, fatigue, anxiety, worry about the future, sadness, can't enjoy life. He has no motivation, no appetite, but he's doing well in school. So all the description of depressive symptoms. The younger sister, she was okay then, but then she, as we progressed and things are not getting much better, she has developed more also symptoms in terms of having some difficulties in school and becoming more difficult for the family. Now, Jerry was born, I'm gonna tell the story about him and then the story about mother. Jerry was born into his family, and as I said very early, the parents divorced. He maintained contact with both father and mother. He lived with mother and grandmother. And father had a lot of problems with alcohol, and that's the reason why he left the family, because mother didn't want to deal with an alcoholic husband. But she was not doing very well either. I mean, she was pretty chaotic, having all these partners. But he did well. Then he went to college, changed colleges, and went to live with father for a time after high school or during high school, and then he went to college. Eventually, he finished his college. He did a master's in this is a family from Texas, University of Texas, in communication and cinematography or something of that sort. But he says that he was somewhat rebellious and was a little he was a good student, but otherwise he would get himself in trouble often. Mother was pregnant when she was 18 and had Jerry very early, and then the other brother. But then after divorce and after marriages and whatnot, she put herself through school, and she got a degree, and she's still working as sort of a supervisor of teachers in the school system. Jerry then, well, I'm going to stop the story about Jerry at that point before they meet. M on this side, M is the oldest of these siblings. Parents get divorced, but father very involved in abuse of alcohol, very chaotic, very violent family, lots of violence, physical and emotional, verbal violence against mother and against M. And the other two siblings would go and hide, and she would take the blows. Eventually they divorced, but mother kept being in contact with the father after the divorce, to the extent of going with him on trips. He was sort of he had a political position in a place there in the town or city they lived in. So she would go and travel with him when he had official presentations, even after divorce. Just to illustrate the level of chaos, at one point he would put a gun in my client's mouth and say that he was going to shoot her. So very out of control. Lot of chaos in that family. Mother was also only daughter of that couple. Father was from Italy, also involved in alcohol, and lots of violence against the daughter and wife. So my client has some difficulty even relating to that period in her life, and she doesn't like to describe it, and she wants to stay away as much as she can from that memory, but also observing what happened, and little by little she has been integrated some of the things how that has affected the way she parents and the way she is. When she was 18, she got pregnant and had that abortion. And then she went to college to Texas, and she went to school, and then she couldn't come back to her country due to the war and the delicate position they had as a family of, I don't know, politicians or something. So anyway, she couldn't come back home. She then met Jay's mother, and they work together, and that's how she meets Jay. They meet. Oh, before they meet, she has a relationship, like a 3-year relationship, with a man who was divorced, but then she had another woman, and they break up, and the next day he gets married with this other woman. So she always says, the men in my life have left me for another woman. So after that breakup with that long-standing relationship with this man who was 11 years older than her, she has a suicide attempt. She overdoses with some pills, but then she clearly survives that. Then she goes, after she meets Jay, she all of a sudden leaves everything in Texas, her work, her everything, and goes back home to take care of the father who was dealing with a severe illness. So she goes back to take care of him, and she stays there for a number of years, taking care of the father. At one point, Jay goes down to El Salvador to visit, and 10 days after the visit, they decide to get married. And they married, and Jay loves it there. He loves the party. He loves her family. He loves the chaos and the lively, how lively it is and how fun. And there's always party and music and alcohol involved, and he loves that. She's a principal in a school, and he is an English teacher at the school. A year after they get married, they get pregnant without any, planification. Elle comes along. At that point, Jay stays home to take care of Elle. M is the primary breadwinner. And he describes how at that point he knew that there was nothing that could keep M and him together, that there was nothing in common, that they didn't have a project as a family, but there they were with this little one. And he says, my son became my life. M expresses, when I got married, Jay became my life, and he became my only goal in life. So you can begin to hear the relationship orientation of these family, how they are oriented towards these relationships, and that's what moves them in their lives, but in a very dependent way. Always, that dependency feels very good at the beginning, that's for sure. But then it begins to create all sort of problems. So here, this is this little unit, father, mother, and son, embedded in this larger family, very chaotic and disorganized. So when Elle is 2 years old, father becomes ill, and they can find what's wrong with him, and he just can't get out of bed. And after 3 months, they decide to come to the US for him to be treated. And I forget what was the problem. So they come, and they go to Texas to live with grandmother, Jay's grandmother up there, in a pretty isolated place in Texas. So he gets better there, and then they decide to move. They don't like it there much, and they go to Dallas. And then they didn't like the city, so they go to the suburbs. And then they didn't like the suburbs either, and they separate for a time, like a couple of months, maybe 6 months. But they decide to go back together and to return to grandmother's area. And M would take care of grandmother, and that was her job, and she was paid for that. There was Ale was little, and Jay got a job, but in a pretty far away place, so he had to commute and to drive, I don't know how many hours every morning. So that was not ideal either. So M finally finds a job in Maryland in the school system, and they move to Maryland. They come here, and the Next daughter is born. They, of course, didn't plan for her birth, but she comes along. And after her, when she was 1 year old, they divorce. So they divorce, and Jay goes to live in a basement, somebody's basement that he rents for very cheap because but it was a very inappropriate place to have kids come over. I mean, it was just a basement. So whenever he wants to see the kids, he goes to M's house and he visits, and so he spends a lot of time there. So he's separate, but he doesn't establish a good footing for himself, not even in terms of where he lives. He maintains a job though. He besides all these problems, he's a good breadwinner and provider for the family. He he's involved in alcohol, and that's one of the reasons why he leaves. Then he gets these. He establishes a relationship with a woman that lasts for two years, which stabilizes him quite a lot. But then they break up, and the minute they break up, he goes downhill and begins drinking very, very heavily. So Em is very worried, and she says, "Why don't you come home? You live in the basement, I live upstairs, and we help you. I help you, and the kids help you get treatment and recovery." So they do that. He comes back home, and he's back in that basement, in that home, for 3 years. During that time, they pretend to be the perfect family, or not perfect, but the regular family. They eat meals together. They go to places together. They go to school for teacher conferences and so forth as one family. Nobody would know that they were divorced. But eventually that closeness gets to them, and they just can't bear anymore the presence of the other. He can't stand her presence and her nagging and her criticism and whatnot. She cannot stand his passivity, and he doesn't contribute to the household, and he's just there listening to music, or I don't know what he did in the basement. So lots of tension began to arise, although he was able to get sober in that context. But then he says, "I need to leave, I need to leave, I need to leave," and he thinks that he wants to do it differently this time. And that's at that point is when they came to consultation. The son was doing well until then. He was 13. He was 13 when he began to experience some of these symptoms. Not until he was 15, they asked for help for him. So I see them together. I see Elle at times in individual sessions, but I am mostly interested in seeing the couple and see how they can find a better way of relating to each other. At the beginning, they're living together, and they're able to stay in sessions and have some discussions. But as time goes by, they just become unable to be in the presence of each other in the session, even though they live together. But the sessions become very, very intense. So I decide that I need to see them separately. I found that was going to be a little more productive. So I see them separately for a time, sometimes with Elle, so mother and Elle, father and Elle, or mother or father on their own. And father, that's when father says, "I need to get out, I need to get out, I need to find a way, and I need to do it differently this time." So he decides that he's going to get an apartment where he can have the kids. And that means that he's going to use more resources for his own independent living, and he's not going to be able to give M as much, and she will need to get another job. And now she's a school teacher, preschool teacher. She has low salary, and he is resentful that she doesn't find another good job like she had before, in the county or something. But he's so, in his sessions, he always describes how he cannot leave because he's worried about M. How is she going to support herself? M says he will never leave because he cannot live without me. How can he be without us and the family? He'll just plummet. I can do it myself. I can find another job, and I can take care of myself. He's the one who doesn't want to leave. So each of them perceived that they couldn't get what they needed because they were doing it for each other. Eventually, Jay said, "Well, you'll have to find another job. I will leave, and I'm not going to reduce the money that I give you to this amount." And she said, "I'm fine. You leave, and I'll figure out my way out." But so she goes out and finds an apartment for him. She selects the apartment. She furnishes the apartment, and he's ready to go. So he moves out.
Mariana,
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know we have other classes beginning at 8:30, so I have to stop by another classroom to see a faculty
It's
member who wants to see me.
uh-huh.
But I'll leave you with the students here to wrap up your case and our IT person still here. I want to thank you for your very, very enriching presentation.
Thank you. It's 8:30 already. My goodness, I thought it was. Anyway, I get carried away with these cases. So at least they have their own space. They have difficulty figuring out what to do with the children, where they spend time, and they have they have difficulties being without the children and finding their own self without the children present. In the meantime, the L is so involved in the relationship. He's the go-to man. Mother says things about father says things about mother, and he's in between, and he's paralyzed. So the way I conceptualize his depressive symptom is just a state of exhaustion of being in that position and just being unable to move on with his life and being trapped in the family web, so to speak. So what am I trying to do in this case? I'm trying to for each of the adults in the family to begin to see the how they contribute to the intensity, how they can regulate themselves a little better. Jay began to drink again, being in his apartment, and he's trying to get into treatment again, but let's see. But Em has 2 jobs now or 3 jobs, I don't know. She can support herself. And I think that she would be the one who's a little more motivated and has more possibility to move forward, backing away from nagging L too much and giving him some space, backing away from talking about husband with him and just dealing with it herself. So that's the case, and that's the way Bowen theory, I think, guides my working with this family, being differentiation of self of the adults in the family, my goal, and less focus on trying to change the son and straighten him up, because I think he's in an impossible position. If the parents don't move away from where they are, he's just trapped and he doesn't have the traction to be able to move. So, I'm gonna stop there and see what you hear about the case and how theory can illustrate what we're seeing here.
Well, Dr. Martinez, what I saw when you gave the description is that definitely J and M, what I've learned to be called falling out of love, they became indifferent. And even though they were indifferent, they still helped one and each other up to a certain point. And that's where you mentioned that in the Bowen therapy, there's the individualistic portion. And again, this is my first time, so I apologize if I don't get it 100% right. But the individualistic portion, where it looks like if you work with both J and M becoming individualistic, you also help, I think you mentioned him as L, and L will just by himself feel better because if his parents are doing better, he feels better. The conflicts that they had because of the indifference was what was relating to that. What I in my in my work right now, and it's not in no way close to being a therapist or anything like that, but in my work right now, I do have something similar to that, where the child is the one that's the problem, yet the child is the one that's the mature one. And that's the one that I brought you up when we were doing the family diagram. But I also see that the parents are the ones that really need more help than the actual child, even though the child's the one who's developed the mental illness. It's very interesting. I really appreciate what I've learned from you today, and I know I'm going to let my other colleagues here talk with you, but I just wanted to thank you personally while I had the microphone in my hand.
Well, I think you got the idea, and you got very well targeted insights about the importance of not focusing on the child as a problem and let's help and solve or change the child. It's about the system. It's about how the adults particularly are dealing with the tension in the system. Yeah. Thank you.
Essentially, what I notice is very similar, that even though you were given a supposed client that had the mental illness, the issues, it seems like with the theory, you look beyond what you're presented, and you, in a sense, you trace the steps, the history as to what led up to that. So I found that very interesting, because it actually answers one of my questions, that even in an individual setting, events occurred that led up to this individual having a supposed problem. So now I see how it could be applied.
Right on. Yeah. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Jeremy. Marcus, do you want to say something?
Well, what really took my attention in this case was, we are talking about differentiation, but it's how the couple, they are so similar, because both of them develop like a dependency and a codependency relationship, and one thinks that the other one cannot survive without. And both have the same thought, the mother and the father. And the child, as always, is just a symptom that something is not going well. Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
It's a symbiosis, what we call the symbiosis in that chart, where they begin as a couple and then they move down. Remember the one that has diagonal that I then made it into pictures? It's that fusion that is created at the beginning of a relationship that then cannot be deactivated as easily, and it creates all sort of problems. Yeah.
They change the setup, but the behavior is the same.
It's the same. Yeah.
Thank
you. Right on. I think those are very pertinent comments, and I think it speaks to your thinking in systemic terms, and that's important. So thank you, and it was my pleasure to be there today.